The moment Claire Whitmore's mother opened the front door, she did not look at her intoxicated daughter slumped against my shoulder. She looked directly into my eyes, gripped my wrist with trembling fingers, and said, "Please stay tonight. If you leave me alone with her, I'm afraid something terrible will happen." What frightened me most was not the desperation in her voice. It was the fresh blood on the sleeve of her pale blue sweater and the sound of someone crying behind the locked door at the end of the hallway. Before I tell you what happened inside that house, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. Stories like this remind our community that the smallest decision to stay can sometimes save an entire family from falling apart. The party had started before noon on a bright Saturday in early spring. It was supposed to be an easy afternoon gathering at a rented farmhouse outside Portland, the kind of celebration where coworkers stood beneath strings of unlit garden bulbs, ate grilled food, listened to acoustic music, and pretended the previous year had not exhausted all of us. Claire had recently earned a promotion at the publishing company where we both worked, and everyone assumed she was celebrating. She laughed louder than usual, raised her glass whenever someone congratulated her, and kept insisting that she had never felt better. I had known Claire for 3 years, long enough to recognize the difference between happiness and performance. Her smile kept arriving half a second too late, and each time her phone vibrated, she turned the screen face down without reading the message. By 3 in the afternoon, she could barely stand. When I gently took the drink from her hand, she did not argue. She only whispered that she could not go home, and then, moments later, begged me to take her there. I was not Claire's closest friend, but I was the person in our office who noticed things. I noticed when someone stopped bringing lunch, when a colleague's jokes became shields, and when Claire began taking calls in the stairwell with her back pressed against the wall. I knew her father had died 2 years earlier, and I knew she had moved back into her childhood home to help her mother. What I did not know was why she had become distant during the previous month or why she looked terrified every time her mother called. During the drive, Claire drifted in and out of sleep in the passenger seat while afternoon sunlight moved across her face. Once, she opened her eyes and said her mother had ruined everything. A few minutes later, she said she had ruined everything herself. Then she began to cry with the helplessness of someone who had been holding her breath for years. I kept my attention on the road and told her she was safe, although I had no idea whether that was true. The Whitmore house stood on a quiet residential street beneath tall maple trees. It was only a little after 4 when we arrived, and the neighborhood was washed in golden daylight. Claire became suddenly alert when she saw an unfamiliar silver car in the driveway. She tried to open her door before I had fully stopped, then stumbled onto the pavement. I hurried around the car and caught her before she fell. She clung to my coat and begged me not to let her mother send her away. Before I could ask what she meant, the front door opened. Margaret Whitmore appeared with blood on her sleeve, her silver blonde hair loose around her face, and fear so raw in her expression that my questions disappeared. After asking me to stay, she pulled us inside and locked the door behind us. The crying came from the back room, but Margaret would not explain it immediately. She led Claire into the living room, where a glass coffee table had been shattered. A family photograph lay face down among the broken pieces. Claire looked at the blood on her mother's sleeve and sobered enough to ask whether she had been hurt. Margaret said the cut was small and came from cleaning the glass, but her voice shook. Then the locked door opened. A teenage girl stepped into the hallway, wiping tears from her cheeks. She had Claire's gray eyes and the same slight tilt to her chin. Claire stared at her as though she had seen a ghost. The girl stared back with equal fear. Margaret finally said the girl's name was Hazel, that she was 16, and that she was Claire's half-sister. Claire's knees gave way. I caught her under the arms and lowered her onto the couch. The truth came out slowly, painfully, and without mercy. Before Margaret married Claire's father, she had given birth to a daughter while still in college. Margaret's parents had pressured her into placing the baby for adoption, warning that she would lose their support and destroy her future if she refused. She had lived with the grief in silence and had never told her husband or Claire. Several months earlier, Hazel had found Margaret through adoption records and sent a letter. Margaret had been corresponding with her privately while trying to gather the courage to tell Claire. That afternoon, Hazel had come to the house with her adoptive father's permission, hoping to meet the woman who had given birth to her. Claire had discovered one of the letters that morning. She believed her mother had hidden an affair and another family from her father. Instead of waiting for an explanation, she had fled to the party, already wounded by the belief that her entire childhood had been built on deception, the room filled with the kind of silence that seemed louder than shouting. Claire's intoxication gave way to rage. She accused Margaret of betraying her father, stealing her right to know the truth, and turning grief into a performance. Margaret did not defend herself. She admitted that fear had controlled her for decades. She had feared losing her parents, then feared losing her husband, and after his death, she feared losing Claire. Each year made the truth heavier, until honesty felt more dangerous than silence. Hazel stood near the hallway, small and rigid, listening to herself being discussed like a storm that had entered the house. When Claire looked at her, Hazel lowered her eyes and apologized for coming. That apology broke something in me. A child who had done nothing wrong was asking forgiveness simply for existing. That I told Hazel she had no reason to apologize. My voice sounded sharper than I intended, but everyone stopped. I reminded them that she had walked into the house hoping for answers, not to destroy anyone. Claire turned toward me with anger, asking how I could defend a family I barely knew. I told her I was not defending the secrecy. I was defending the one person in the room who had no part in creating it. Claire stared at Hazel again, and for the first time, she seemed to see a frightened teenager rather than evidence of her mother's betrayal. Still, pain had already taken hold of her. She said she needed air and pushed herself toward the front door. Margaret blocked her path, not forcefully, but with the desperation of a mother who believed that one departure might become permanent. Claire shoved past her. Margaret lost her balance near the broken glass and fell hard against the edge of the fireplace. The sound of her head striking the wooden mantel silenced us all. She collapsed to the floor, and the blood on her sleeve was suddenly no longer the most frightening thing in the room. Claire screamed her mother's name. I called emergency services while checking Margaret's breathing. She was conscious but confused, and a swelling began to form near her temple. Hazel knelt on the opposite side, holding Margaret's hand while Claire sobbed and repeated that she had not meant to hurt her. The ambulance arrived while daylight still streamed through the windows, turning the broken glass into scattered points of light. At the hospital, the waiting room felt suspended outside time. Margaret was taken for scans, and the three of us sat beneath harsh fluorescent lights while the sun remained visible through tall windows. Claire's drunkenness faded into nausea, shame, and terror. She confessed that she had spent years believing she was responsible for keeping her mother stable after her father's death. She had declined a job in Seattle, ended a relationship, and moved home because Margaret seemed unable to manage alone. Discovering Hazel made Claire feel that all her sacrifices had been offered to someone she did not truly know. Her anger was not only about the secret. It was about realizing that love had slowly become obligation, and obligation had turned into resentment. Hazel listened without interrupting. Then she explained that she had not come to take Claire's place. She had grown up in a loving home with parents who had always told her she was adopted. She had searched for Margaret because she wanted to know where her laugh came from, why she hated thunderstorms, and whether anyone in her biological family also drew tiny houses in the corners of notebooks. She wanted history, not ownership. She had imagined meeting a mother who had thought about her every day, but she had never imagined finding a sister who might hate her before knowing her. Claire covered her face and began to cry. This time, the tears were quieter. She admitted that Hazel looked exactly like their father's younger sister, even though they shared no blood through him, and the strange familiarity made everything more difficult. A doctor eventually told us Margaret had suffered a concussion and needed observation, but there was no bleeding in her brain. Relief moved through the waiting room like oxygen returning after suffocation. Claire asked to see her mother first, but when she reached the doorway of the treatment room, she froze. Through the opening, Margaret looked suddenly fragile beneath a white blanket. The woman Claire had seen as controlling and secretive now appeared exhausted, frightened, and human. Claire stepped inside, followed by Hazel and me. Margaret apologized before anyone else could speak. She said secrecy had begun as something forced upon her when she was young, but she had continued it as an adult, and that part belonged to her. She told Claire that love did not excuse dishonesty and told Hazel that regret did not automatically make her worthy of forgiveness. Claire sat beside the bed and admitted that she had been angry long before finding the letters. She resented having shaped her life around her mother's grief, yet she had never been brave enough to say so. Margaret looked stunned. She had believed Claire stayed because she wanted to, while Claire believed she had no choice. Their relationship had been built not only on a hidden child but on years of unspoken expectations. Margaret told Claire she should take the Seattle opportunity if it still existed. Claire said the position had been filled months earlier. Margaret began to cry, but Claire stopped her from turning the moment into another punishment. She said lost opportunities could not be recovered by drowning in guilt. They could only be honored by making different choices next time. Hazel remained near the foot of the bed, unsure whether she belonged in the conversation. Margaret reached out to her, but Hazel did not immediately take her hand. She said she needed time. She had spent months imagining that finding Margaret would close an empty space inside her, but instead it had opened several new ones. Margaret nodded and lowered her hand. That small act mattered. She did not demand affection, forgiveness, or the title of mother. She allowed Hazel to control the distance between them. After a moment, Hazel stepped closer and placed 2 fingers gently against Margaret's palm. It was not a reunion polished into perfection. It was a beginning that respected the damage already done. By early evening, sunlight still lingered across the hospital walls. Margaret was admitted overnight for observation, and Claire refused to leave until a nurse assured her that her mother was stable. Hazel's adoptive father, Peter, arrived soon afterward. He was a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes who hugged Hazel so tightly that she disappeared against his chest. He thanked us for keeping her safe, then walked into Margaret's room. I expected anger from him, but he spoke with calm dignity. He told Margaret that Hazel's life had always been filled with love, yet love did not erase the need to understand where she came from. He made it clear that any future relationship would move at Hazel's pace. Margaret agreed. Claire and I walked outside while the sky remained pale and bright. She apologized for placing me in the middle of her family crisis. I told her I had chosen to stay. She asked why, and I realized the answer had little to do with responsibility. Years earlier, my younger brother had called me during a difficult afternoon and asked me to come over. I had been busy and promised to visit the next day. He survived the overdose that followed, but our family never forgot how close we came to losing him. Since then, I had learned that when someone asks you to stay because they are afraid, you do not always need to understand the whole story before deciding that your presence matters. Claire leaned against the hospital railing and watched the trees move in the breeze. She said she feared she had become the worst version of herself. I told her one terrible moment did not define her, but what she did after it would reveal her character. She could blame alcohol, grief, or betrayal, or she could take responsibility and rebuild trust through consistent choices. Claire nodded. The following week, she entered counseling, stopped drinking, and requested a temporary leave from work. She did not do it to earn praise. She did it because she finally understood that pain left untreated could injure people who never caused it. Margaret also began therapy. She joined a support group for birth mothers who had surrendered children under family pressure and wrote Hazel a letter that contained no excuses. Hazel did not answer immediately. She returned home with Peter and spent several weeks deciding what she wanted. When she finally contacted Margaret, she asked for a meeting in a public park during the afternoon. Claire came too, but only after Hazel invited her. They sat beneath a maple tree with coffee and lemonade, comparing childhood photographs and discovering small similarities. Both hated raisins, both collected old postcards, and both became silent when deeply upset. The meeting ended without dramatic promises. Hazel allowed Margaret one hug, and Claire gave her a notebook with tiny houses drawn in every corner. Months later, Claire accepted a position in Denver. It was not Seattle, and it was not the life she had once planned, but it was hers. Margaret helped her pack without asking her to reconsider. On moving day, Hazel and Peter visited. Hazel carried in a small framed photograph from their park meeting. Margaret placed it beside the old family photograph that had once fallen among the broken glass. She did not replace the original. She made room beside it. That choice became the quiet symbol of their healing. The past could not be rewritten, and no new relationship needed to erase an old one. Their family grew not because everything was forgiven at once, but because each person stopped demanding that love look simple. Before Claire left, she hugged her mother in the driveway beneath the clear afternoon sky. She apologized again for the fall, and Margaret told her forgiveness had already begun, but trust would continue to require honesty. Claire agreed. Hazel stood nearby, not yet comfortable calling Margaret Mom, but no longer afraid to call her by her first name. When Claire came to hug me, she thanked me for bringing her home and for staying when leaving would have been easier. I told her that I had only stayed for one difficult day. She and her family had done the harder work by staying present for one another afterward. What would you have done in Claire's position? Would you have been able to forgive a parent who had hidden such a life-changing truth, or would the betrayal have been too painful? Please leave a meaningful comment about whether honesty should always come before protection, even when the truth may hurt. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Sometimes redemption does not arrive through one grand apology. Sometimes it begins when a frightened person asks us to stay, and instead of walking away, we remain long enough for the truth to enter the room. Claire's family was not healed in a single afternoon, but that afternoon taught them something they had forgotten. Forgiveness does not mean pretending the wound never happened. It means choosing, carefully and honestly, not to let the wound become the end of the story.